Welcome back to Behind the Headlines. More heat advisories, more heat warnings, more flash flooding, and a hyperactive tornado season. 96 so far in Missouri. So is this climate change in the Midwest? Kate Grimke with Harvest Public Media checked into this recently and joins us now from St. Louis. Welcome, Kate. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So with the extreme heat and the flooding, the tornadoes we've seen this summer, is this a precursor to climate change?
So we know that climate change is already happening here in Missouri. We're seeing warming trends across the state and across the Midwest. And last year was actually the third warmest year on record in Missouri. It was the second warmest here in St. Louis. So with climate change already happening, there is some fingerprints of that in these types of events, but we're expecting them to get more intense. So climate change, some scientists call this global weirding. It basically means that we're seeing extremes in all kinds of different directions. So flooding is definitely one of the things that we're going to see more of. We're going to see heavier rainfall. And then on the flip side of that, we're also seeing more intense drought. So there's kind of two sides of that coin. And then we're also seeing heat waves here in the Midwest. Tornadoes is a little bit weirder to measure. So tornadoes, so that's a little bit weirder because our records have actually changed quite a bit in recent years. Our Doppler is getting better. And so we're actually getting better at finding tornadoes and seeing them. And so there are some things we know about climate change and tornadoes, like that tornado alley is actually moving east and south a little bit, or that we're having tornadoes at weird times of year. But we don't have as much information about that as we do about things like heat and extreme rainfall.
So how has this affected people living in our region?
So there have been tons of effects from this in the last few weeks. We saw really intense flooding on the upper Missouri River. You might have seen some really dramatic photos and video from Iowa, from Nebraska, from South Dakota. And there, a lot of my colleagues have been covering the impact on farmers. So there have been a lot of crops that have ended up underwater. And one farmer we spoke with said that that means they're going to have to rely on crop insurance. They're not going to be able to grow those crops this year. And then here in St. Louis, the extreme heat has a really big effect for seniors and for people who are disabled because they're on fixed incomes often. So I spoke with one organization that distributes air conditioning units for people on fixed incomes, and they said they're getting tons of calls, and they really do believe that this is climate change.
So tell us about the scientific view, specifically the USDA Midwest Climate Hub, as it's called. What do they say is going on?
That's right. So I spoke with Dennis Toddy, who directs that climate hub, and he said we have to be very careful about labeling individual events as climate change. So scientists use something called attribution science, which means they lay out all these different models that are kind of showing different amounts of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and how something might have played out. And then they compare the specific event to that. So you've probably seen attribution science with huge events like hurricanes, but it's just less common for scientists to do that for every little record-breaking day of heat or every flood that we see. And so Dennis said, without that type of attribution science, we can't say that something was definitively climate change. But on the other hand, climate change is already happening and it is affecting all kinds of different weather. And so he said that while it's not possible to kind of say that was climate change that created that flood, we can say that climate is having an effect on our weather already.
So give us a quick science lesson, Kate, on why more water and greenhouse gases warm up the atmosphere.
Yeah, so we get radiation from the sun and it heats up our Earth. And we have greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that actually do a really good thing for us, right? It's the perfect temperature for life on Earth. We're able to have plants and animals and humans because of greenhouse gases keeping us warm on our planet. But the problem is when you add more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels, there are too many and we start to get too warm. And so as the heat leaves the surface of the Earth, it doesn't go out to space as much as it used to. Instead, it's kind of bouncing around, and it's like we put a coat on the Earth. And as we get warmer, we're actually also seeing that warmer air holds more water. So that's a problem for extreme precipitation way up in the atmosphere. It means that we're seeing huge amounts of rain dumped at once, but it also means that it's more humid. We're getting more humid days and it's just hotter for us here. And so that's kind of the basics of climate change science.
So are some surprised that this is happening already in the Midwest?
I think that unfortunately, the scientists I talked to said that this is kind of what they were expecting, and it's going to keep getting more intense. I mean, there are some things that have been kind of surprising about how climate change is playing out, both in the Midwest and across the country. And there's still more work to be done to find out exactly how it's going to affect things like tornadoes. But yeah, unfortunately, I think scientists kind of expected this.
And before you go, Kate, this is a new term to me. What does warming whole mean?
Yeah, that is an interesting term, and I learned a lot more about that in the last couple of weeks. So, warming hole basically describes if you look at a map of the US and where we're seeing extreme high temperatures, we're seeing really big heat waves like that in the Southwest and in the East. But over most of the Midwest, there's kind of this warming hole, as they call it, where it's not actually getting that extremely hot. So I talked to Missouri's state climatologist who said that we're actually seeing less days above 90 degrees in Missouri. And the way that warming is happening, like I said, we're having some of the warmest years on average in the States. So we are seeing climate change here. But what's happening is we're seeing a ton of warming in the winter and overnight. So this year we saw the warmest February in record in Missouri. And you might remember there was kind of a heat wave in February. We saw very warm days. And then also overnight, it's not cooling as much as it used to. So, like I said, we've got more humidity going on, and that humidity kind of balances out temperatures. So it holds on to heat, but it also means that it doesn't get as hot during the day. But not getting cool overnight is a problem. It's definitely a problem for livestock who are living outside. And then it also just makes it harder for us to cool our buildings down. And so scientists said that this warming hole has been kind of a surprise that it's not, climate change is not moving how they thought it would. And they don't really know when this is going to end, but they do think that it will. And after that, we might start seeing way more of those 100 and more degree days.
Definitely something to think about next time we see the latest forecast on TV. Kate Grumpke with Harvest Public Media. Thanks very much for joining us, Kate. You can see her reports online and on social media, as well as this conversation on KY3.com, our KY3 News app, also on Roku, Fire Stick, and Apple TV+. Kate Grumpke, we look forward to seeing you again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you.